Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to keep up with our latest stories. It was one of those crisp autumn days that made everything feel sharper, as if the air itself had turned to glass. Leaves lay brittle beneath each step, cracking like old paper, and whispers seemed to carry farther than they ever should. At the center of Red Hollow County's fairground arena, Grant Mercer stood with polished boots crunching softly on gravel. Once celebrated as a tech titan, the visionary behind sprawling cloud empires and groundbreaking advances in artificial intelligence, Mercer, now dressed in worn denim and rugged leather, his Stetson pulled low over his brow as if he were trying on a new life that hadn't quite settled on him yet. He lifted a megaphone to his lips, his voice steady, calm, and filled with the kind of confidence that commanded attention. $1 million, he announced, letting the number hang heavy in the air. To anyone who can get that dog to sit beside them for 5 minutes. Every head in the crowd turned toward the far corner of the arena. Behind thick, reinforced steel bars stood a large, scarred German shepherd named Bruno. This was no ordinary dog. Bruno had been discovered wandering the ruins of a wildfire zone, wounded and feral. 3 different shelters had tried and failed to tame him. No leash lasted more than a few moments. No voice could soothe him. His growl was a deep, rolling warning that kept even the most experienced handlers at a cautious distance. But Mercer wasn't interested in rehabilitation. He wanted spectacle. There are rules, Mercer continued, voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. No prior contact. No training. You get 1 shot. Watch him from a distance. Come back in a month and try your luck. A ripple passed through the gathered crowd. Cameras rolled, capturing every second. Yet no one stepped forward. Amid the hum of voices and clatter of equipment, almost unnoticed, a small figure stood near the back rail, a 10-year-old girl with wide, determined eyes and tightly clenched fists. Her name was Ivy Rowan. She had no sponsors, no special training, no connections. What she had was a reason. That night, while the town buzzed with excitement over Grant Mercer's challenge and news stations replayed footage of the growling dog. In slow motion, Ivy lay awake in the cramped room she shared with her mother. The ceiling above was cracked and stained, and Ivy counted every fissure as well as the seconds between her mother's coughing fits. 2 years earlier, Ivy had lost her father, a quiet man with calloused hands who had taken her hiking in the woods, teaching her how to listen to the wind, to stillness, and to the kind of silence that spoke in stories. He had died in a car crash on a rainy morning, and since then, Ivy's world had shrunk to hospital visits and worn second-hand blankets. Now, her mother's illness was worsening. Doctors spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors. Bills arrived in bold, unforgiving print. Ivy, barely 10 years old, understood more than most adults ever wanted her to Ivy. The $1 million wasn't just a staggering sum. It was hope. It was the promise of medicine, surgeries, electricity that wouldn't flicker off during cold nights. It was even the faint possibility of a new guitar, though she never said that aloud, especially not when her mother's breath rattled like a broken wheel every time she lay down. Ivy had never trained a dog. She'd never visited a clinic or even owned a pet. But when she'd seen Bruno on the news, something inside her had quieted. He didn't seem angry or vicious, just lost, like her Dot, so she decided that if she couldn't reach him with force, maybe she could reach him with understanding. That night, by the dim light of a flashlight, Ivy gathered every book on animal behavior she could find from the school library. She took meticulous notes, made charts, and drew timelines. She kept it all secret from her mother. Not yet, she whispered to herself, and in the quiet moments between coughing fits, she looked up at the faded photo of her father that hung above the bed and whispered, "Help me, please." The day arrived colder than expected. Ivy stood at the edge of Thirna, clutching a weathered guitar to her chest. Its surface, scratched, strings were thin. It had once belonged to her father. He used to play lullabies on it after dinner fingers. Slow voice soft, it was the only thing she had left that still carried his warmth. The crowd pressed and whispering reporters jostled for angles. Grant Mercer sat high in thigh-viewing box arms, folded lips, a thin unreadable line, and Bruno he waited band. The heavy bars, the dog paced, shoulders rippling beneath a coat of tangled fur. His eyes swept the crowd without. Seeing them he didn't bark, hadn't lunged, but something about his stillness felt more dangerous than motion ever could. Ivy stepped forward. People gasped. The child alone, no leash, no gloves, no training badge. Her sneakers barely made a sound against the pack of dirt. She kept her eyes on Bruno. Not challenging, not afraid. When she stopped 10 feet from the cage, she sat cross-legged and placed the guitar in her lap. She didn't speak. She played the first chord, cracked in the cold air like something forgotten, a simple tune, one her father had written just for her. It wasn't perfect. Her fingers trembled, but the notes floated clear, open, familiar. Bruno froze. His ears twitched, his eyes shifted, and then slowly he stepped forward. The crowd held its breath. Bruno approached the bars. Ivy kept playing, heart-pounding thin. Without command, without coaxing, he sat, his body heavy against the gravel, gaze fixed on the fave girl, and the sound carried 5 minutes past. No growl, no movement, just silence and the sound of strings. Grant stood, lips parted, stunned. Ivy looked up, reached a hand through Thebers and gently touched Bruno's fur. The applause hadn't even died down when Grant Mercer's voice cut through the arena. Like a blade, not enough. He descended from the box boots, echoing on the metal steps. Cameras turned, catching the tightness in his jaw, the way he moved, like a man forced into humility but still clawing for control. 5 minutes of stillness. Doesn't mean the dog strained, he said loud enough for the crowd to hear. It proves nothing. Ivy stood silently beside Bruno, her hand resting lightly on his fur. The dog didn't move. Grant stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. Here's the real challenge, he said, pointing at Ivy. If you want the $1 million, then Proveo can command him, make him follow your lead under my conditions. Gasps rippled through the stands. The judges whispered among themselves, but no one intervened. You'll have 30 minutes with him beforehand. No tools, no trainers, no tricks. His voice sharpened. And I'll give the commands if he obeys you, even when I'm in control. You win. Ivy hesitated. She looked up at the man towering over her. This wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about pride, power, revenge. She didn't like the rulish, didn't trust Grant, but she thought of her mother, pale and tired in that small bed of hospital lights and unpaid bills, of what $1 million could do. She nodded once. Fine, she said quietly. I'll do it. For a moment Ivy felt her chest tighten. The $1 million so close. Just minutes ago now felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She didn't know how to command a dog. She had no tools, no experience. This wasn't fair. But then she thought of her mother, how thin her arms had become, how her voice sometimes cracked when she tried to smile. Ivy clenched her fists. This was her only chance, and no matter how twisted the rules, she wasn't going to let it slip away. Not for herself, for her mother. She drew a shaky breath, looked down at Bruno, and whispered under her breath, "We've come too far to stop now." They gave her a quiet corner of Pfeffer grounds, an old horse stall, clinged out and cleared far from the crowd's eyes. 30 minutes, that was all. No instructions, no supervision, just Ivy, a battered guitar, and Bruno. The dog stood at the edge of the space, muscles taut-tail low, his body ready to run or defend at any moment. Ivy didn't approach. She didn't call his name. She simply sat down in the straw-covered ground and opened at the guitar case. Her hands shook slightly as she tuned the strings. "I'm not here to make you do anything," she said softly, not looking at him. "I just wanted to know you better." She strummed a quiet chord, letting the notes settle between them like dust. Then she started talking. She told him about her dad, how he loved music and mountains, and once rescued a fox pup with its leg caught in wire. She told him about her mom's sickness, about the hospital smell that never left her clothes, and the fear that sometimes pressed so hard on her chest she couldn't breathe. Bruno didn't move, but his ears turned, his eyes flickered toward her, then away again, and then she saw it, one of his front Pause. The left tone twisted just slightly. Her heart stumbled. The twist, it wasn't just Attitail, it was a memory, a scar. I remember you. She breathed. You were just a baby. Weckled you lucky. Bruno's ears perked opened. He took a hesitant step closer. High size. Softening as if recognizing her voice, she reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out a strip of plaid fabricorn and faded. Her father had used it as a sling to carry a pup home through Thewoods years ago. She'd kept it ever since Esh held it out. Bruno stepped forward, then another step. His nose brushed the cloth and his body softened. Shoulders lowering, tail relaxing, breath no longer tight. Then gently, as if he remembered too, he pressed his head into Ivy's chest, and in that moment no words were needed. Ivy barely breathed as Bruno stayed close, head still resting against her chest like it had found home again after years of wandering. The moment felt fragile, like a thread spun from something older than memory, something neither of them could explain. Only Filch kept playing soft and slow, letting the guitar hum like a heartbeat, and while the notes filled the stall, Ivy told him the rest. She told Bruno how Herded had died just 1 month after they'd rescued that injured pup, how he never got to see the dog grow up or watch Ivy get taller, how everything had changed that night. Sirens, headlights, a phone call, and then silence. She hadn't spoken those words out loud in a long time. Bother now beside the dog. She once saved it felt right. I think she whispered, you were meant to find your way back to me. Bruno looked up at her, and in his eyes there was no confusion, no fear, only recognition. Ivy smiled through tears. Shouldn't ask him for anything more. They had already said enough. But when the 30-minute mark arrived and the gate opened for the final challenge, Bruno stood beside her, unleashed uncode, and followed her out into the light. He didn't need Tog commanded. He had already chosen. Thirna was louder now. Word had spread fast about the girl. The dog theme. Possible moment of stillness. Specters filled the stands. Neck screening. Phones lifted. They weren't just there to watch anymore. They were waiting to believe in something. Ivy stepped into the ring, Bruno beside her, moving with quiet confidence. No leash, no collar, no hesitation. Across from them, Grant Mercer stood with arms folded, flanked by handlers, and a mic clipped to his shirt. This expression unreadable, but his posture screamed challenge. Begin. Hesed. Ivy didn't flinch. She knelt downside. Bruno whispered something, only heckled here, and stood up straight. Grant gave the first command. Sit. Bruno sat instantly, tail curling neatly around his paws. The crowd murmured, down. Grant barked sharper. Bruno lay flat, chin to the ground, eyes steady on Ivy's stand. Heel circle. One by one Bruno obeyed, fluid responsive but never robotic. His gaze never left Ivy, as if every move was a conversation between hearts. Note obedience to a voice. Grant's jaw tightened. Jump the barrel. A pause. Bruno looked at Ivy. She gave a single nod. He leaped it clean, strong, and landed soft, lithe, and Grant stepped closer, his voice lower. Now call him away from her. Ivy Shard stuttered. Bruno turned toward Grant's voice but didn't move. Come here. Grant snapped. Still Bruno didn't budge. He looked back at Ivy, ears twitching. Guncher. She didn't speak. She just smiled, and slowly Bruno turned back to her, sat down again, and placed one paw gently over her foot. The arena erupted. People stood. Cameras flashed. Even the judges clapped. Grant didn't say a word. His face had gone pale. Ivy bent down, hugged Bruno close, her whisper barely heard over Theror, thank you for choosing me. The check was real, the signature, the stamp, phaseros, every one of them. Ivy held it in her hands like it might vanish. If she blinked too hard, she didn't take it home. Ash took it straight to the hospital. The doctor stared, stunned, then moved. Fastest were run medications, ordered appointments scheduled with specialists Ivy had only seen in brochures, and within weeks her mother, pale, thin, always tired, began to smile. Again, sit up in bed, law up no longer felt like pretending. And Bruno stayed close wherever she went. He followed, calm now, never leashed, but never far. They walked through field trails her father once loved, and when they passed the creek where she'd played as a child, Bruno would splash his paws and look back, as if to say, I remember too. Grant Mercer never called, but one day his assistant returned, this time with no cameras, no conditions, just a legal envelope hand-delivered in Sadia. Letter handwritten, he heard what you did, the man said, eyes soft, and he wanted you to waive him no contracts. No strings. Bruno is officially hers, no longer a challenge, no longer property, just family. Life didn't change overnight, but slowly, gently. Ivy began to breathe a deeper sleep, longer smile more. Bruno was always beside her through every doctor's visit, every long night in the hospital waiting room. He would curl up at her feet, calm as shadow when they returned home. He followed her through the quiet halls, down the paths her father once walked. They were growing together. Ivy still played her father's guitar, but now with more certainty, more story in every chord. Bruno would lay beside her as she practiced, his eyes closing slowly as if the sound stitched something back together inside him. As Ivy grew, so did her music. By 17, she was performing in cafes and concert halls. People said her sound had something they couldn't name, something raw and true. What they didn't know was that every note carried pieces of fire, memory loss, and one dog who never left her side. Bruno, now graying around the muzzle, moved slower than he used to. His eyes still shone, but his steps grew heavier. One late afternoon, golden light pouring in through the kitchen window. Ivy knelt beside him, rested his head in her lap, let out one long steady breath, and didn't talk. Their tears streamed down Ivy's face as she whispered, "Thank you for everything, my friend." No cries, no fear, just stillness, peace. She buried him beneath the old oak tree in their backyard, wrapping him in the same plaid cloth her father had once used. Later that evening, Ivy sat on the porch steps with her guitar and played the first song her father ever taught her, the Samoan she had played the day Bruno chose. Her tears came quiet but full, and when she finished, she whispered, "Thank you for saving me too." Bruno wasn't just a dog, he was her childhood, her memory, her music. Years passed. Ivy's name quietly wove its way into the hearts of those who truly listened, not to fame or noise. Budo music that felt like memory. Her songs weren't just notes, they were echoes of something lived, something learned. Every time she played, someone in the crowd cried, not because her music was flawless, but because it was honest. She never stopped telling Bruno's story, not just because it was beautiful, but because it was true. Every festival, every school, every late-night interview, she spoke of Fepup. Her father helped save the same dog Woe later returned to save them both. She said it plainly, we didn't know it then, but the day my dad and I helped that little dog, we were saving a piece of our future. That act, quiet, kind, without expectation, became the thread that tied together what had once been broken. It was a reminder that even the small stacks of kindness can return to us in the most unexpected ways. It bought her mother more time, it healed a young girl's bruised heart, and it reminded a forgotten world that love, when given freely, finds its way home. So Ivy played in a house filled with light beside a guitar worn with years. She let her fingers tell the story, and if you listened closely, you might hear more Ethan music. You might hear a memory, a promise that everything we give in kindness returns when we need it.